So, good morning everyone. We are the second to the last group, and our topic is women issues in development. So, before knowing what is development, let us first know what is women issues. So, the definition of women issues varied but included women's sexual and reproductive health, childcare leave, domestic violence, equal pay for equal work, marital law, welfare policies, and education. In several cases, women's issues were defined as women's struggles for the achievement of equal rights and privileges. So, what is development? So, over the decades, questions have been raised as to whether women's development is a separate issue to that of development in general. So, research on the ground claims that, in general, women have not benefited from development processes, programs, and projects to the same extent as men had. So, development can sometimes even undermine the role, status, and position of women in society. So, development affects men and women differently, but often with a more negative impact on women. So, women's health, education, economic opportunity, and human rights are fundamental in achieving successful economic growth and stable societies. So now let us know what is the woman in development. So the woman in development, or WID. So it is an approach emerged in the early 1970s when it became known that where women were not benefiting from development due to their exclusion from development programs. So the Women and Development made demands for women's inclusion in development. However, it did not call for fundamental changes in the overall social structure or economic system in which were to be included. So, the WID is a concept based on a recognition of the importance of the roles and status of women in development process. It is meant to give special attention to the woman's role while extending development assistance. So the WID focus on women exclusively and almost outside of the mainstream of development. So next is the Women and Development, or the WOD. So it is an approach of the late 1970s focused on the interaction between women and development rather than purely on strategies to integrate women into development. So it appeared that neither men nor women were benefiting from development due to class inequalities and the unequal distribution of wealth. So, the WAD focuses on the social or gender relations between men and women in society and emphasizes the productive and reproductive roles of women. So, the WAD also focuses on the relationship between patriarchy and capitalism rather than focus specifically on women's relationship to development. So, that's all.
I am Irish Chicovers, and for today, I will discuss with all of you the gender and development, or GOD, and the practical approaches to the development of women. First, the welfare approach, and the second is the equity approach. So before we formally start, let's begin in gender in development. So gender and development, or GOD, theoretical approach. The gender and development GOD approach focuses on the socially constructed differences between men and women, the need to challenge existing gender roles and relations, and the creation and the effect of class differences on development. The Gender and Development, or GOD, primarily promotes women's empowerment and ensures that their full participation becomes essential for society. It has been formed by the government to respond to the gender imbalances and inequalities existing in the country. Under the Gender in Development is the Magna Carta of Women or Republic Act Number 9710 defines the Gender and Development Program or GAD as the development perspective and process that is participatory and empowering, equitable, sustainable, free from violence, respect of human rights, support of self-determination, and actualization of human potentials. It seeks to achieve gender equality as a fundamental value that should be reflected in development choices and contents, that women are active agents of development, not just passive recipients of development. The welfare approach. It is the earliest approach introduced in the 1950s and 1960s. It is the residual model of social welfare under colonial administrations. This approach was most popular from 1950s to the 1970s but still widely used. Welfare is the earliest policy approach concerned with women in developing countries. Its purpose is to bring women into development as better mothers. Women are seen as passive beneficiaries of development. The reproductive role of women is recognized and policy seeks to meet practical gender needs. Through that role, through top and down hands-out of food aids, measures against malnutrition, and family planning. It is non-challenging and therefore is still widely popular. The welfare approach. It is the oldest and still the most popular social development policy for women in particular. It can be identified as pre-WID or Women in Development. It was a first world welfare program widely initiated in Europe after the end of World War II, especially targeted at vulnerable groups which were among the first to identify women as the main beneficiaries. Until the early 1970s, development program addressed the needs of women almost entirely within the context of their reproductive rules. The focus was on the mother and child health, child care and nutrition, population control or family planning as it later came to be known as a major focus as due to the link made between population growth and poverty. The focus was clearly on meeting practical needs. The welfare approach is based on three assumptions. First, women are passive recipients of development rather than participants in the development process. Secondly, that motherhood is the most important role for women in society. Thirdly, that child rearing is the most effective role for women in all aspects of economic development. Equity approach. Equity is the original WID approach introduced within the 1970s and 1985 UN Women's Decade. Its purpose is to gain equity for women in the development process. Women are seen as active participants in the development. It recognizes women's triple role and seeks to meet strategic gender needs through direct state intervention, giving political and economic autonomy to women and reducing inequality with men. New modernization projects with innovative agricultural methods and sophisticated technologies were negatively affecting women. Finding indicated that neocolonialism as much as colonialism was contribute to the decline in women's status in developing countries. Feminist calls for gender equality were important in bringing about this approach, the main aim of which was to eliminate discrimination. It emphasized the revaluing of women's contribution and shared benefits from development. The equity approach also dealt with both productive and reproductive roles as a responsibility of government. The emphasis on revaluing women's contribution and share of benefits meant that the approach dealt with issues of policy and legal measures as a means of bringing about equity. The equity approach, in contrast to the welfare approach, saw women as active participants, organizing to bring about necessary changes.
We also have here the anti-poverty. So there are two strategic approaches to tackling poverty. The strategy one is raise the incomes of those with low incomes, while strategy two is reduce the knock-on effects of having a low income on housing, schooling, safety, health, or healthcare. Strategy 1 policies typically take the form of an income supplement such as Social Security, disability insurance, TANF, or a tax credit. So, the strategy 1 goal is simple: to get more money into the pockets of those with least income from other sources, and so reduce the number of people falling into poverty against whatever benchmark is selected. Also, labor market policies can also lift incomes at the bottom and reduce poverty. The minimum wage is the most example of it, but the most effective way to raise the incomes of poor people is simply give them more income. Strategy 1 policies attempt to reduce the number of people in income poverty, usually by transferring income directly. So, Strategy 1 anti-poverty policies are necessary but far from sufficient. Tax credit for those in paid work help to make work pay and cut poverty at the same time. But the problem is that they do not reach the very poor, who are usually disconnected from the labor market. Strategy 2, anti-poverty policies. So, unlike strategy 1, the main difference is that they provide services, not cash. So, they do not make poor people any less poor in the narrow income sense. So, but if successful, they reduce poverty in a broader multidimensional sense by reducing the correlation between income poverty and other factors such as education, housing, crime, or health. So here are some examples of the goals of Strategy 2 policies. So we have here improving schools in low-income neighborhoods, moving low-income kids to safer neighborhoods with better schools, investing in quality affordable housing, subsidizing pre-K for low-income families, financial aid to help poor kids get through college, and strengthening public transport, especially in poor areas. So, in strategy 2, we must work on these strategies and make poverty less, because the motivation of strategy 2 policies is to decluster disadvantage. So, to borrow a pace from Jonathan Wolf and Avner Deshalit, authors of Disadvantage, inequalities will always exist on all dimensions, but these inequalities are amplified when they strongly overlap. We also have here the efficiency approach, wherein the development strategy examined is women in development, or WID. The efficiency approach is focuses on enhancing women's roles in production and increasing their incomes as a means of contributing to their gaining gender equality. So, to improve women's development planning include increasing gender awareness, strengthening women's interest and capacity in political participation, developing risk mitigation strategies to lessen insecurity. Lastly, we have the empowerment approach. So, generally, women empowerment means to take part in decision-making process that enhances her worthy living. So, it is an active multidimensional process that enables women to realize their full identity and power in all spheres of life. So, in the field of development, economics, women's empowerment is defined as the process through which women acquire the ability to make strategic life choices in a context where disability was previously denied to them. So it is from based on Kabir 1999. So in women empowerment, we have there three approaches. So development integrated development approach, economic development approach, and consciousness raising and organizing approach are not fulfilling the expectation of women, as the whole process of decision making is done by the men. So whereas women participation is indispensable for equal, so just and gender unbiased society. In addition, it also indicates that women are ignored in decision-making process because male attitudes toward female is not positive, which causes gender discrimination in the society, so leading the existing approaches of women empowerment to rethinking for a new approach, which may fulfill the goal of women empowerment in the new millennium. So that's all for our report. We hope that you learn something and understand our topic. Thank you all for listening. Stay safe and God bless.